stayed at the number 11 for a minute or so now. So if we just get going, and then obviously anyone that is joining can hopefully catch up. So welcome everyone to the Supporting Surrey Commercial Awareness and Business Development event. So this is hosted by Surrey Law Society, and today we have Catherine Fisher here, the managing partner of Morr Co, who will be giving the talk, and I'll go into a little introduction about her in a moment. So this session is part of our business skills initiative under the Supporting Surrey initiative. So that's the focus for this year. So you can see on the screen there have been other events, and there are also other events coming up. Obviously, we've got the one in December as well that you can see on the screen. Recordings, as you would have seen just now, are available for all of these events. So if you would like a recording, then get in touch with us at Surrey Law Society and we can sort out a recording for you. Otherwise, if you would like to sign up for the events, again, do so via the website. And obviously you get the emails coming out to your firms as well, which you'll be able to sign up to. So just a very short introduction as well in terms of housekeeping. If you would like to ask any questions during this event, please do so by either raising your hand, and there is obviously the hand function, you can do that via, or just do it in the Q&A section. So you'll see there's a little tab where you can enter a question and we can get to those at the end or as Catherine goes along. This webinar is obviously being recorded, as I've said, so that's just to let you know that, but any questions can be sent anonymously, so not to worry. So just getting on to what the event is actually about. So as I said, it's commercial awareness and business development. So Catherine is the recently appointed managing partner at Morr Co. She's had an amazing career and great experience in terms of seeing how ultimately law firms run as a business. And we've got a very mixed audience here today in terms of senior people and also, like myself, a lot more junior. So it will be really good in terms of just getting to sort of know, if you're at the junior end, for example, actually what is involved in running a law firm, because it's not just as straightforward as we perhaps think when we first enter the industry. And then also beneficial, obviously, to our senior counterparts who are actually doing a lot of the grind and running the law firms for us. So yeah, I'll hand over to Catherine now to introduce herself in a bit more detail. And as I said, any questions, please just put them in the Q&A box.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Bethany, and welcome everybody to this seminar. As suggested by Bethany, just a little bit about me to start with, in case you haven't had a chance to look me up on the internet before joining the session today. I started work more years ago than I care to admit to in the city with the law firm that became Dibb Lupton Alsop. And since leaving DLA, I've worked in regional firms, most recently at Coffin Mew on the South Coast, which is now part of Knights, and at what was back then Barlow Robbins, of course, now Morr Barlow, and at Morr Co, where I've been for, I think it's 9 years now. I've always been a litigator, right from my very first seat as a trainee solicitor. I knew within the first week that that was what I wanted to do and nothing was going to shake that. And I count myself very fortunate that every Monday morning for the last, I'm going to say it now, 30 years, I've woken up excited by the week ahead. I love what I do and I'm extremely lucky to love what I do. However, 30 years is quite a long time to do one job. And a few years ago, I started thinking that it would be good to have the opportunity to stretch my abilities as a team leader and as an owner of the business in a slightly different direction. And so when our former managing partner announced that he was planning to retire, I decided that it was a job that I would like to do. And here I am. What I want to talk to you about today is a few things about some of the lessons I've learned along the way, not only as a practitioner. I was recently enough a practitioner to know how it feels to have to meet your monthly billing target. And I still remember that fear. Also, as a team leader, I was the head of the firm's dispute resolution team before I became managing partner. So I know how it feels to lead a team and to do appraisals and to set objectives and to have to support and encourage people who, for one reason or another, aren't finding it easy to meet their targets. And finally, and very recently, as managing partner, I'm fairly new in the job, but I think I know enough already about the business of leading a law firm to be able to tell you a bit about how it feels from the managing partner's chair looking down. And hopefully what I've got to say is going to be of some use to you. I have a particular and passionate loathing of PowerPoint. It's unavoidable when you're doing a Zoom presentation because nobody wants to just sit and look at my face for an hour. And if we were doing this live, I'd be able to engage your attention by dancing up and down a stage or twirling sticks or something like that. But it's so much more difficult through a screen. So I have done slides, but I do encourage you, please, to pop in questions, give a thumbs up if I ask you for some input. Otherwise, you're simply an audience rather than participators. And I'd really like you to participate today, if that's something that you feel you want to put your head above the parapet to do. So let me start the screen share process. So you should all be able to see my screen. Bethany, could you perhaps give me a thumbs up just to let me know that it's apparent for everybody?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, excellent. All right. So what I've done is I've broken this talk down into 3 sections. The overall topic of commercial awareness and business development is pretty huge, and I could quite cheerfully sit here for probably 2 solid days and talk to you about that. So I've broken it down into 3 sessions where I think I can probably tell you something that's going to be useful to you. And the first of those is just to think about actually what it costs to run a law firm as a business, and where we start from in terms of sitting down 3 months away from the end of the financial year to begin the business planning for the next financial year. So just a little idea for you of some of the things that we have to spend money on in order to keep the wheels turning. Staff and the professional indemnity insurance premium are normally the 2 single biggest overhead costs for any law firm. And every firm's IIP premium varies. So it's not much use my telling you what that might look like, because, for example, firms which do a lot of residential conveyancing, which is regarded as very high risk by insurers, will have a higher premium than firms that do less of it or that have a mixed bag. But certainly staff, probably one of the biggest overhead costs. And I've just put down for you some of the things that go beyond just the bald overhead cost of what we pay our staff in salaries. There are costs involved in running training, membership of seminar programs, costs involved in practicing certificates, recruitment costs, horrible, horrible, horrible. We all burn when we have to pay an estate agent a percentage of the purchase price of our homes when we buy and sell them, but recruitment costs, and I hope there are none of them listening in spy mode, but the average recruiters will charge a fee of 10% of the first year salary for a recruit. And if you are a business that's aggressively recruiting, or if you're unfortunate enough to lose some key people during the course of the year, recruitment costs can very, very quickly become quite a nasty hole in your cost budget. Christmas parties, not in the scheme of things, a particularly expensive thing to do. And it's a slightly flippant entry because that stands for all kinds of employee reward schemes. Your firm might subscribe to Perkbox or to discounts for gyms and that kind of thing, just to make your life a better place. And all of those things come at a cost. One point on salaries, by the way, I know from both a former salaried employee and now as a business owner, and from talking to recruiters, that the law profession still has this hangover, this idea that, as a very rough rule of thumb, your salary and your target ought to work on a multiple of 3. So you'll probably all be familiar with the idea that if you're paid 40 grand a year, your billing target ought to be 3 times that, for example. Well, that's a historic reflection of the fact that in times gone by, the percentage overhead cost for firms of their staff was about 30%. And that's nowhere near the case now. Salary costs have gone up because of the recent inflationary pressures, apart from anything else, far more quickly, actually, than things like utilities and service charges. So for most firms now, their salary costs are probably north of 40% of their overall cost of the business. So you can see very quickly, if you have a conversation with your line manager who breaks the news to you that your target for next year is going to be more than 3 times multiple you thought it ought to be, that's why. It's because the overall cost to the business is no longer 30%. So from a manager's point of view, next time you're having that conversation with your manager, cut them a bit of slack if you think your budgets are going up higher than they ought to be in terms of your fee target. Other things on that list, the obvious ones really, premises, IT. It's not just the people who sit in the corner of the office and mend your computer when it breaks. There are lots of other hidden costs in there, subscription to law books and your library, the costs of archiving and shredding. Most firms will spend, even if they are paperless, the thick end of 50 grand a year on posting stuff. So do use DocuSign, use email, it all helps to keep the costs down. I can tell you this because our accounts are publicly available now, but broadly speaking, it costs this firm about £11 million a year to keep the lights on. And that's quite a scary number when you think about it. So that's just a bit about what it costs, what the business is that you're in. And again, this might seem a bit obvious, but I think it bears reflection. What do law firms sell? None of us sell sheep, funnily enough. What we sell is your service. We sell your intellectual capacity. We sell your ability to do work. We sell your time. We sell a service. And that means that, to put it fairly bluntly, each of you is a commodity because you are what we sell. And I think this is something that's really important for you to bear in mind at the start of your career, because you are the commodity we sell. And if you want to make yourself a valuable commodity so that you can negotiate a good salary increase, so that you can negotiate more interesting work, so that you can command the respect of your peers and have clients banging on your door to bring you interesting work to do, you need to start thinking about yourself as a commodity that other people are going to want to buy. And I know that sounds a little bit venal. And many of you are probably fairly still close to law school when I hope a lot of you had some fairly idealistic notions about what it means to be a lawyer and why you want to become a lawyer. And nothing I say today should make you want to squash those ideals, because being a lawyer is an odd mix of vocation and commercialism, because we all became lawyers because we wanted to help people. I know that sounds a bit daytime TV, but it's true. We all became lawyers because we wanted to help people in one shape or form. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to align the conflict between that vocational ideal and thinking about commoditizing yourself as a product effectively. And I'm not going to pretend that anybody's got the answer, but hopefully some of the things I'm going to talk about to you today will help you with that process. So some of the things that you need to think about in terms of how you sell yourself as a commodity, how your law firm sells you as a commodity, are the 3 things that are on the screen now. Lawyers have historically always sold themselves by reference to the time they spend, hourly rates. And that's for a very good reason. It's because in our business, time is literally money. People have been talking for as long as I can remember about the death of the hourly rate, about the fact that lawyers shouldn't be charging by reference to the amount of time it takes them to do a job anymore, and that clients aren't prepared to pay for work that's priced on an hourly rate basis. And I do think that we have been seeing an increasing move towards fixed price work. For a long time, lawyers who work in property and in transactional services have been more familiar with fixed prices for their work. But that's increasingly spreading now to litigators, to employment lawyers. It's pretty common now, for example, for an employment lawyer to work to a fixed price for agreeing on a settlement agreement. And some of those things are an opportunity and some of them are a real challenge, because if you're going to sell an item, your advice, at a fixed price, you have to make sure that that fixed price is still going to make you money, because you've got that £11 million cost burden to meet at the end of the year. And law firms aren't charities. They're in business to make a profit so that they can return that profit to their staff by way of salary increases. So you need to be careful, and I'll talk some more later on in this presentation about hourly rates and fixed fees. I'm just going to make like a windmill and wave my arms about because I'm in a motion sensitive room and it's suddenly gone dark. The other things you need to think about in terms of market pressures, commodities, is market pressures. You're always going to be facing competition. One of the things that I've been thinking about recently in conjunction with our private client team is the service which is being increasingly offered by the likes of Co-op, who will do you a fixed price for your estate administration. So we're always going to be facing pressure from competitors who might have more experience than us in pricing a ton of frozen peas at a fixed price and translating those years of experience into selling legal services. So don't be fooled into thinking that lawyers are always going to exist in their current form. There's always going to be competition, and that competition is a healthy thing because it forces us to innovate. One of the last things that I want to talk about here in terms of thinking of yourself as a commodity is you have to think about the kind of work that you do, the kind of work that you want to do, and the kind of business that you work in. And that's why I'm talking there about specialisms against economies of scale. And that's a reference to the different ways in which law firms can set themselves up as businesses. There are some law firms who will set themselves up in such a way that they will have a large number of people doing a high volume of work on a fairly small profit margin. And that works because there are just lots of them. That's the economy of scale. And there are other law firms at almost the other end of the scale who deliberately set themselves up as specialists in their field. They might specialize, for example, in litigating in tax schemes that the Inland Revenue is taking a particular interest in. And that's very high specialism work and commands a very high price. There aren't very many people who do it. A lot of law firms sit somewhere between the two. They will do some volume work. They will have some specialisms. And there is debate, if you read about these things in management websites, about whether law firms ought to position themselves at one end of the scale or the other, and whether there's still a place for law firms in the middle. I firmly believe that there is still a space for the mid-tier, mid-size law firm that offers a full service. And my firm and the firms that many of you listening belong to are proof positive that there is still a place for firms like that in the market. So that's a bit about how much it costs us to run the business and what it is that we sell. Managing your KPIs. All of this stuff is probably stuff you know, but it bears repeating. The topic of this talk is commercial awareness. And one of the things that you need to bear in mind when we're talking about building commercial awareness in a junior lawyer is an awareness of the fact that your financial KPIs are not just a stick to beat you with. They are there because your firm has worked out that it needs you to bring in that amount of money in order to make all of the sums across all of the firm add up at the end of the year. And there are some really easy ways of making sure that you manage your KPIs effectively. For those of you who work in fixed fee environments like residential conveyancing, you may well say, well, there's not much point in efficiently recording my time, because no matter how much time I record, I'm only ever going to be able to charge X amount of money for doing this piece of work. And you're deluding yourself if you think that that is going to work long term, because we still need to know how much it costs us to deliver that service to a client. And at the end of the year, when whoever it is that leads your team thinks about whether or not those fixed prices ought to be put up, or whether they could come down, or whether we ought to be a bit more clever about offering add-ons, they can only make those decisions armed with the data about how much it's cost us to sell that service in the first place. So time recording is important. And for those of you who work in teams where your time is literally your money, time recording is the alpha and the omega of meeting your targets every year. I've put there, get your clock on. Not many of you, maybe all of you, I don't know, might have time recording systems in your firms which enable you to run a real-time timer when you're working, rather than just posting a fixed amount of time. And if you have the opportunity to run a real-time timer, use it. Everything you do takes longer than you think it does. And that is just a fact. I've known that probably since the end of my second week at work, and it's still true now. Even after 30 years, I will think that it will take me about 4 hours to do a first draft of a witness statement. And I'm still wrong. I've always been wrong. It always takes far more than 4 hours. So use your real-time time recording, because it's only by building that knowledge bank in your own mind about how long it actually takes you to do things will you be able to accurately start thinking about pricing your work as you get more experience. Data is everything when it comes to pricing, and you need to start building a sort of back brain awareness of how long it really takes you to do things. And you can only do that by recording in real time. So if you remember nothing else from today, it's the phrase, get your clock on and keep your clock on. I could stop now, couldn't I? The other big bugbear on KPIs is recoverability. It's really no good to anybody, not you and not your firm either, if you spend a month working solidly on a really interesting piece of work, whether it's a disclosure exercise or it's assisting in an M&A transaction, or whether it's selling a complex piece of multi-use commercial property. If you send your bill to your client at the end of the work you've done, and your client chooses for one reason or another not to pay you, if your client decides to take the opportunity to pick up the phone to your team leader and say, well, that was an excellent outcome, I'm absolutely delighted with Jeanette, she's done a fabulous job. However, £5,000 bill, I'll tell you what, let me pay you 3.5. I can pay that today and let's call it quits. I can't tell you how many depressing times I've had that conversation in my career. And that chip from a client, if you multiply that across the business and think about how many times that conversation might be happening, has a real and very damaging impact on the overall bottom line. So you as lawyers need to take responsibility for recovering your bills. It's your job. It's your job to do the work. It's also your job to make sure you get paid for doing the work. So if your firm has a policy, and I'd be surprised if it didn't, of suggesting that you should always get money on account of your estimated costs before you start work, then do it. It can be difficult to have those conversations with clients. Nobody is pretending that it isn't a hard conversation to have. But those hard conversations don't get any easier if you put them off. And they don't get any easier if you don't practice them. So have a talk to your line manager, to some of your peers, to some of your colleagues about how you can have those conversations. A lot of us, if we're about to have a difficult conversation with an opponent or with someone on the other side of a transaction, you might spend 5 or 10 minutes before that call jotting down some key points, jotting down what you think are your best points, thinking about some of the things they might say to you in reply and how you deal with them. And having conversations with your client about money are no different. Prepare for those conversations. Think about the points you want to make. Think about emphasizing the value that the client is going to get from your service, and explain clearly that just like your client, you are running a business and your business needs to make sure that it's going to get paid. So practice having those conversations, plan those conversations, and don't be afraid of having those conversations. To paraphrase the L'Oreal advert, you are worth it. You are worth the time you charge. So don't be embarrassed or shy or reticent about asking clients to put their money where their mouth is and making sure that you get paid. The other important thing on recoverability is careful cost estimates. I'm quite sure that all of you at one stage or another have got into that awful sticky situation where you've given the client a cost estimate. And then either the work has become really urgent and you've had to work all weekend without thinking that you would, or alternatively, some unexpected wrinkle has come up, something that neither you or the client anticipated. And because it's an interesting wrinkle, you've rolled up your sleeves and you've got stuck in and you've found a solution. And what you've forgotten to do is say to the client, I didn't plan for this. This wasn't in the original scope of work. And exactly like a builder would, this is a painful moment for me because I'm having that pain at the moment. A builder doing a small extension at my house. Ooh, well, we hadn't factored on discovering clay right there. And now we've discovered clay, we're all of a sudden going to have to dig an extra 2 feet down, and I'm afraid it's going to add this much to the cost. Well, you know, it's not a dissimilar conversation that you have with your client. It's not your fault that this unexpected wrinkle has emerged. You're more than capable of dealing with it, and you're going to deal with it really well and really efficiently, but it's changed the scope of the work, and that needs to be factored in the price. Sorry, we're just having a fire alarm going off. It's a routine one, so I'm not going to run to the door, but you are going to hear the Nino. I'm sorry about that. A pause for a moment.
We can't actually, I mean, from my end, Catherine, I can't actually hear it. So
you can't hear it
talking, it's not too bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not stopping. So I have a horrible feeling that I might have to open the door and make sure that this isn't a real alarm. It stopped. All right. Well, that was unexpected. So where were we? Yes, careful cost estimates. It's always better to overestimate, because a client will only be delighted if you deliver a bill that's well under the estimate. It's a far more difficult conversation to have with a client to say, well, I know I promised you that this would only cost £5,000, but actually it's going to cost £8,000. And even if it isn't your fault, if it's for reasons beyond your control, it's still a less easy conversation than to be generous with your cost estimates at the outset. Again, that might not be something that's within your control. You might not control the pricing of your work at this stage in your career. But if you are involved in pricing, if you have any autonomy over the pricing of your work, start thinking about the fact that you need to build yourself in that builder's margin of error, that 5, 10, 20%, depending on the type of work it is, to cover you just in case things get out of hand. And billing. This is a phrase that our former managing partner used to use all the time. There's only one way to eat an elephant. There is only one way to eat an elephant. At the beginning of every financial year, the clocks reset and you open your laptop or you start your computer on day one, and there it is, your target for the year in all its terrifying glory. Well, there's only one way that you're going to get to it, and that's by meeting your monthly billing targets. That's what I mean when I say there's only one way to eat an elephant. So try your best to get into the habit when you're looking at your workflow for the month of thinking to yourself, by the time you're getting to the middle of the month, which of my matters am I going to be billing this month? Which of my matters can I send an interim bill on? Which of my matters can I say to the client, well, I've done quite a lot of work on this now and there's still more to do, but I'm going to send you an invoice now, just so that we're spreading the cash load for you. Don't lose sight of the fact that you should get into the habit of billing when you've reached an appropriate moment in a transaction. Don't leave your billing always to the end of the month. And there's another really good reason not to do that from the management point of view, if you like. And that's that it does help with cash flow. If you've done the sensible thing and you've got money on account and you raise a bill on, let's say, the 14th or the 15th of the month, and you've got money in your client account to pay that bill straight away, that's cash in the till right there and then for the business, which then doesn't have to wait an extra 2 weeks for everyone else to decide to do their month-end billing and put all the cash in the till that the business was expecting for that month. So it is helpful if you can get into the habit of raising bills mid-month or whenever it happens to be at a natural pause in the work. Sometimes if you're doing something that's really high pressure and high intensity and you're working on it non-stop, all hours of the day and night, you can bill weekly or even more frequently than that. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, about billing at the end of the month is that if you're billing a corporate client, they will have a payment run themselves, and it's nearly always at the end of the month. So if you send them an invoice on the 31st of the month, the chances are it will fall into their next month's billing run and you won't get paid for a month. Now, you know, possibly there's enough slack built into your debt KPIs that you'll be allowed 30 days wriggle room, if you like. But why build that problem for yourself? If you can just be a little bit smarter about your billing and shift your billing forward a couple of days, you'll make sure that your corporate clients are getting your invoices, if you haven't got money on account, in that month's billing run. So it'll be put in their payment run for the 31st of the month and you'll get paid on the 1st or the 2nd. Happiness in all directions. So just a few tips there to bear in mind and start thinking about when you're managing your KPIs and trying to make sure that you get all the way to the end of the elephant's tail by the end of the financial year. Okay, so moving on. I said I'd talk to you a little bit about pricing and about client behaviour and about some of the things that you can think about to help you when you're having those difficult conversations with clients about pricing. And again, I appreciate that quite a lot of you are right at the early stage of your career and maybe pricing isn't something that you have a lot of control over, but try to make sure that you're always involved in those conversations with your line manager so that you begin as early as possible to learn about how to think about pricing and how to have those conversations and how to scope your work and plan it. You do, as a lawyer, have to learn project management skills as well as legal skills, because otherwise you won't ever deliver your work on time or to budget. So although some of this might sound a bit intimidating, once you get started on it and once you get used to doing it, it starts to come a lot more naturally. So certainty. This is one of the big advantages for clients in terms of legal expense. One of the most terrifying things for a client is the fear of an open-ended, I'm mixing my metaphors, but bottomless pit of legal cost. And you can understand that if you put yourself in the shoes for a moment of a client who's come to you for a piece of work. Perhaps they've just lost their job, they feel they've been unfairly dismissed, and they want to take their employer to tribunal. If they're anything like a regular member of the public, they won't actually have that much money to spend on you. And the idea that they might have to set aside a potentially unknown amount of money for month after month after month until they get a resolution is something that would keep me awake at night if I were that client. Or think about a client who's come to you in order to have their late parents' estate dealt with. Perhaps that client isn't in a particularly healthy financial position themselves. Perhaps for the last few years, they've been banking on this inheritance to clear some debt. If you put yourself in that client's shoes, you'll start to understand that certainty over legal cost is actually a really attractive prospect, because even if the overall number is a bigger number than they might have been hoping for, and it always is, the certainty, the value to the client of that certainty can far outweigh sometimes the worry over how they're going to afford to pay you. Even at the other end of the scale, if you're acting for a corporate client, if your contact at your client is the finance director, that finance director has to report to the board and has to say, well, we're involved in this piece of litigation, and I've got absolutely no idea how much it's going to cost us, and there's just a big fat question mark in our profit and loss projections for the next 6 months. That's not going to make him look too great to his reports at the board. Far better if he can say to the board, I've managed to agree with our lawyers that although we're involved in this piece of litigation and it could be a bit scary, I've managed to agree a fixed fee with them of a maximum of £45,000 to get through the preliminary period, take it to a mediation and get a resolution. £45,000 is a number that might make his fellow board of directors swallow a bit, but they know what the number is. They can plan for it. If need be, they can go to the bank and borrow it because they know what the number is. So do think about how this feels for your client before you start thinking about pricing your work, and think about how it's going to feel to your client to make that message a bit more acceptable to them and a bit less terrifying. Fixed fees, again, if you're going to think about fixed fees, and each firm is different and each firm approaches this differently, there is a lot of software out there that promises the ability to help you price work in various different ways. If you're a junior member of your firm, you're not going to have any input at all, probably, into management decisions about whether or not to buy that piece of software. Some of them are very whizzy, some of them look marvelous, but none of them are cheap. There are things you can do to help yourself absent a whizzy piece of software. And I've put on the screen there data to help you. You'll remember I was talking to you earlier about the importance of running a real-time clock to help you build that back brain understanding of just how long it takes you to do things. Well, you can help yourself by keeping data about how much it has actually cost you to do things. If you don't have access to the software, talk to the rest of your team about implementing some processes to record how much the end bill was for each of various different categories of work. So how much did it cost you, beginning and end, to do an estate that was valued at, I don't know, let's say £450,000 with no particularly hideous tax complications, no beneficiaries gone absent, no foreign properties, you know, a plain vanilla estate. How much did it cost you? If you're thinking about dealing with a shareholders agreement, how much has it actually cost you in bills billed to the client to do the last 5 shareholders agreements you drafted, for example? And once you've started building that data bank of information, you can start having a platform on which you can build a real way of pricing fixed fees. it's beyond the remit of this talk to talk to you about how to do that work, and your own firms will have their own preferences about the margins you apply on fixed fees. But when you're thinking about a fixed fee, you need to think about the type of work that you're doing. Is it plain vanilla? Is there anything about it that you think is likely to take it out of the ordinary? Are there things about it which make you think that this has the potential to get completely out of control and to become an enormous monster that you need 20 people working on it with you to get under control? At one end of the scale, if this is a plain vanilla piece of work and you need to just build in the unexpected, like the client turning out to be a lot more needy than you thought they would be and emailing you 100 times a day, you might want to think about adding a margin of something like 20% to what you think it will actually cost you in terms of time recorded. At the other end of the scale, if you're looking at something that you think has the potential to become your worst nightmare and the kind of case that's going to leave you carrying the scars for 5 years, I would suggest to you that that is not a piece of work you should do on a fixed fee, or at least not all in one go. And you might want to think about breaking down the individual tasks into fixed fees where you can. And in the middle is your sweet spot, the kind of work which has the potential to be a bit tricky, but you think you can mostly foresee what those are going to be. And you've got some fairly good data about what this kind of thing has cost you in the past. And then you can think about adding a margin to that fee of something like 40 or 50%, which might sound like a lot. But bear in mind that when you're offering the client a fixed fee, you're offering to share the risk with the client that this work is going to do what you think it's going to do. And that pricing, rather like a success fee on a conditional fee agreement, is your measure of what that risk represents to your business. Again, thinking about pricing, if you're doing urgent or complex work, please try to wean yourself off the idea that you should just charge your hourly rate, okay? Because to repeat the strapline again, you're worth it. In fact, you're worth more than that. If the phone rings at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and for a start, no litigator will answer it, because it's an acknowledged rule of thumb that no litigator will ever answer the phone after 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, because only bad things happen when you do. But let's say you do answer that phone call, and it's a client who needs you to do something for them urgently, and it means you're going to have to surrender your weekend, and you're going to have to get through this project, this piece of work, by a fairly tight time frame of, let's say, lunchtime on Monday. Well, the giving up of your free time and the working out of hours is something that you are entitled to charge a premium for, and you should. And I would challenge you that I don't think you would ever find a client who wouldn't accept that they would need to pay a premium for asking a lawyer to ditch everything and work over a weekend or overnight, or to deal with something that is a particularly risky piece of work that's going to expose that firm to a potential negligence claim if they get it wrong, or something that's particularly complex. So when you're thinking about pricing work and you're thinking about selling that price to the client, think about what it is the client is asking you to do. What's the client asking you to put on the line here? And why shouldn't the client pay for that? So just bear that in mind when you're thinking about the work you're being asked to do. Even if it's not necessarily urgent or complex, even if you're just really, really busy, and the client has come to you because they particularly like you or they've used you before, there's no shame in having a conversation with the client that goes something like, do you know what, I am absolutely snowed. If I have to carve out the time to do this for you, I'm going to have to work until 10 o'clock every night this week. And I will do that for you, dear client, because I like you and you're valuable to me. But I'm sure you'll appreciate that I'm going to have to reflect that extra effort in the price that I charge you for the work that I'm going to do. I would feel no embarrassment whatsoever in having that conversation with the client. The final point I want you to bear in mind when you're thinking about pricing and client behaviour, and some of you may well have heard this or read it somewhere on LinkedIn, but there's an old story, apocryphal story that goes something like this. A ship's captain drives a tanker into harbour and sends for a mechanic because one of the engines isn't working properly. And a mechanic from a local, very highly regarded firm comes onto the ship and says to the captain, well, I'm going to charge you my hourly rate of £85 an hour, and I'm sure I'll get the problem fixed for you. And the captain says, sure, crack on, we need to sail by dawn tomorrow. And this engineer potters all over the engine room, simply can't find the answer to the problem, and the captain's getting a bit desperate because the deadline is upon him. He's going to miss his tide. And his first mate says to him, well, I know we've tried the official highly certificated engineer, but my uncle lives in the village across the hill and he's a genius with anything that runs on petrol, and we're desperate. So why don't we just give him a call? And the captain says, absolutely. So uncle comes bustling over the hill, whizzes down into the hold, spends 15 minutes looking at the engine and whips out a tiny hammer and gives it one smart tap right in the bottom right-hand corner of the engine manifold, and the whole lot whirs into life and the problem's fixed. And he hands the captain a bill for £45,000. And the captain says, well, you're only here for 15 minutes. And the uncle replies, absolutely, £5 of the bill is for my time in fixing the problem, and the rest of it is for knowing how to fix it. So think about the fact of your value to the client, the value you are adding to the client in the piece of work that you're doing. And if the client's asked you to do a piece of work, which is, maybe it's not particularly straightforward, but because of who you are, because of the years you've spent training, because of the trouble you've taken to send yourself on courses to learn about this particular discrete area of the law, you're the best person for this job. So even though you know that it's probably only going to take you about an hour and a half to come up with an answer, don't be ashamed or embarrassed or reticent about charging the client for the value of what's up here, because that's what they're paying for. And I think that's probably all I've got to say to you about pricing and client behaviour, because there's something else that I want to spend the last 10 minutes or so talking to you about. And it's the last part of what I was asked to discuss with you, which is business development. And I come back to the idea of you as a commodity. What are you selling? What kind of lawyer do you want to be? And if you want to be a specialist kind of lawyer, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about building a specialist practice? And I think that's really important to start thinking about at the early stage of your career, because you have probably all been in practice long enough now to have an idea of the kind of lawyer you want to be, of the kind of areas you want to specialize in, and the kind of impression that you want to give people when they meet you. Do you want to be known as the approachable, warm, supportive lawyer who your client will turn to in their hour of need? Does that align with your practice area? Do you want to be known as a tough negotiator, as someone who's fair but who won't give an inch? What kind of things do you want to think about doing in order to project that image of yourself to your peers and to your clients and to the wider marketplace? Because, as I said at the beginning, you are a commodity, and you are the person who knows you best as a commodity. And you are by far best placed to sell you, to maximize you, and to build you and your practice into the kind of lawyer that will give you joy every day of your working life and that clients will want to use. And that's really important, because if you finish up shoehorning yourself into an area of law or into a way of practicing that doesn't fit you as a person, only misery will result from that. So it might sound like a little bit of a sort of cod psychology thing to say when you're talking about business development, but authenticity is really important. People are going to want to work with you if they feel that you are authentically you. So if you're not the kind of person who feels comfortable standing up in front of 300 people and delivering presentations, well, you know, there's training you can do to help you with that. But if the idea of that just makes you want to sob in a corner for a week, don't do it. Don't do it. There are other things you can do just as effectively. So think really carefully before you start thinking about business development and client development and who you are and what you want to be, about the kind of person you are and the kind of things that you find easy to do. No one really enjoys walking into a room of 30 people they don't know and wandering smash up to the nearest group and sticking out a hand and saying, "Hi, I'm Bethany. It's really great to meet you. Let me tell you all about me." I mean, that feels most normal people with a little bit of a twinge. But that's the kind of stuff you have to do as a professional, and it gets easier the more you do it. But what I'm talking about is, again, those kinds of things, those kinds of events that really might make you feel uncomfortable. So practically speaking, what kinds of things are actually going to help you do a decent job of business development? Again, you have to think about the kind of person you are, the kind of lawyer you want to be, the kind of profile you want to build, the kind of experience you want to develop. And you should use the opportunities of your annual appraisals with your line manager to start thinking about things that you want to specialize in, qualifications you want to get, whether those are step qualifications or whether you want to become a solicitor advocate or whether you want to think about doing court of protection deputy work. All of those areas of quite niche areas of law, you need to start thinking about them and planning your journey and thinking about the kinds of things that will align with those work areas. So if you want to do a step qualification, for example, and what sings to you as a person is working with the elderly and with the vulnerable, you might want to think about aligning with the kinds of organisations that help with mental health awareness and charities that are involved in that sector. Because if it's an area you're interested in, you're going to enjoy doing it. And if you enjoy doing something, you'll be good at it. It's almost an immutable law of nature. The second thing I'd say to you about business development is habit and diarising. And you know, what do they say? It takes 3 months to build a habit. Unless you make a habit of doing business development activity, you'll never learn the habit of doing business development activity. So set aside a window of time every week when you're going to do something that raises your personal profile or increases your business development activity. And I would suggest that a good way of starting is to block out half an hour on a Friday afternoon to make phone calls to people you haven't spoken to for a while. They might be referrers, they might be clients that you haven't spoken to for a year. Friday afternoons are a good time because pretty much no one is head down in a really difficult piece of work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. You know, gin o'clock is approaching, the weekend's coming. Picking up the phone to you when you ring them to say, "How are you? We haven't spoken for a while. Do you fancy meeting up for lunch next week?" It's going to be an easy way of getting them to want to talk to you at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. So I'm not saying take that as gospel, but it's worked for me over the years. It's something that you might want to adopt. And again, data. Data is your friend. Your firms will all have client relationship management programs, I'm sure, but keep your own data, your own records. Make a diary note 3 months after you've closed a file to reach out to that client and say, "It's been 3 months since I last bought you your dream house. How's it going for you? Is everything all right?" The subtext to that is, remember me when your next door neighbour wants to sell their house and put in a good word. You don't need to say that out loud. We're all grown-ups. We understand how it works. But just make sure you make it easy for yourself to have those phone calls, to have that little black book of people you know, people you contact, people that you play golf with, if golf is your thing. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. So one of the last things I want to talk to you about is something that, again, might be a little bit early in your careers to start thinking about this and having these conversations. But this is an adaptation or a frank steal, if you will, from a company called the PACE Partnership, which does a lot of professional training to a lot of business development training to professional services firms. And I've always found this a really useful thing to bear in mind when you're thinking about the clients you want to work with and the clients that you want to keep happy and the clients you frankly never want to see again. We've all got them. And sometimes it can be a really useful exercise to look at the clients who are in your metaphorical filing cabinet, because nobody has paper anymore, and put them into these categories, not P1, obviously, because those are clients you don't yet have, or P2, but look at the clients in your cabinet and think about those clients who you want to keep, who you'd be happy to take instructions from again. And think about your problem children clients, the clients who always complain about the work you've done for them, no matter how hard you try. The clients who will never pay a proper price for the valuable work that you give them, the clients who are just difficult end to end. You know, sometimes they're clients who you can make a lot of money out of, but you do have to sit back sometimes and ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is it worth the 5 years off my life that it's going to cost me to live with this client for the next 6 months if they're just going to be a nightmare? And don't be afraid to talk to your supervising partner and just say no. We all get the little prickles in our thumbs. You get halfway through a phone call with a new inquiry and you think, do you know what? My alarm bells are ringing left, right, and centre. Don't be afraid to say no, because, you know, future you will thank you for it. Again, this is just an idea for something for you to start thinking about. You can find this on the internet for yourself if you Google the PACE partnerships. Start thinking and having in your mind's eye when you're planning a business development activity for yourself. If you get invited to an event, for example, what are you going to get out of that event? Is it going to be worth your valuable time? Is it going to expose you to the kind of clients who might fall into the P2 category? Prospects, people you know you'd like to work with, clients in the sector that you are interested in. And just think about categorizing clients in that way and being deliberate about the kind of where you spend your time in marketing to them and attending events and so on. I have a feeling I'm out of time. Yes, past, in under the wire. There might just be time for questions. Please either unmute yourself, type it in the box. Anybody got any questions? I can't see any. Bethany or Helen, can you see any that I'm not seeing for one reason or another?
I can't see any questions. But if nobody has any, then I mean, are people free to contact you if they did? Oh, I think we've just got one actually. So we've got Emma says, what piece of advice would you give your younger self when you started your career?
What piece of advice would I give myself when I started my career? Yeah, one expression, which if you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's a book called, I think it's called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, who was the COO of Facebook for a long time. And she repeated in the book over and over and over again, done is better than perfect. Done is better than perfect. It's much better to get to a deadline, to achieve a piece of work, than beat yourself up over polishing that perfect piece of work in perfect font size. So give yourself the ability to reach a goal and don't set unnecessary obstacles in your way by telling yourself that a piece of work or a qualification has to be perfect. It doesn't always have to be perfect. Make life easy for yourself. I think I'd tell my younger self, don't give yourself an easier ride.
No, that's a really lovely piece of advice. And we've also got, oh, okay, it's just Emma responding. I thought it was another question, but she said thank you. So unless we have any other questions, last chance for anyone to put their hands up. I think that brings us to a close. Just double checking. No, okay, yeah, we haven't got any other questions. So thank you, Catherine. That was so useful, and definitely from my perspective, as you know, being so junior as a trainee, it's so insightful to actually know sort of the thought processes in terms of what goes around on in terms of running the law firm, and just how much I've never actually thought of the actual figure. And like you say, 11 million just to keep the lights on. It's anxiety inducing. But no, that was extremely useful, and hopefully everybody here has also found that really useful as well. So thank you. And in terms of just housekeeping to close as well, obviously you can get in touch with Surrey Law Society if you would like a recording of this webinar, and also get in touch as well if you would like to attend any future events as part of the Supporting Surrey initiative. And I should have really set it out at the start. I just presumed that everyone would be aware because you probably come to these events before. But the Supporting Surrey initiative is between Surrey Law Society and Surrey Junior Lawyers Division. So I sit on Surrey Junior Lawyers Division as the universities and colleges representative on the committee. And we've also got our vice chair here, Martin, as well, who's also on Surrey JLD. So yeah, please do get in touch with any of us if you have any questions, or Catherine herself. And yeah, just thank you again for your time, Catherine. It was really insightful.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. I do hope it's been useful for you. And as Bethany says, if you do have any questions you want to email me directly, please feel free.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.